Hello, hello, hello. Thank you everyone for joining us. Got a decent crowd at the end of the day. I thought you'd all be off taking shots and getting wine at the bars in Lisbon. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, I'm very happy to be joined by some very esteemed panelists in the world of fintech today. We've got Takeuchi, it's been a very long day. Hiroki Takeuchi, CEO of GoCardless to the right, and we have Lucy Liu, co-founder of Airwallex, sat here next to me. We're going to talk about a lot of things. The title of the panel, obviously, ecosystems versus egos. So I'll start with yourself, Lucy, just in terms of kind of the theme of the panel. We're obviously looking at, is it right to partner, is it right to compete? From an Airwallex perspective, where do you land on that topic? Obviously, you partner with many of the biggest banks, sort of infrastructure players. Where does Airwallex sort of sit in that narrative?
Yeah, so thanks, Ryan. So I think for a while we've been really talking about fintechs versus banks, right? Like, as if we're always against each other. But then if you think about the world of finance, it's a huge, huge cake. And it's impossible for one institution to be, everywhere and doing everything. So I think over the years, we're going into our 10th year next year. So the perception has really shifted from this whole, we're not banking fintechs because of their risk, because they're going to take our business, to, how can we work together to expand the whole industry and make sure that, we're doing financial inclusion, we're making sure that the products are being taken care of, the customers are being taken care of, because banks realize they can't possibly meet all of the demands of today's customers and businesses.
Totally. So technology is the sort of bread and butter that players like Airwallex do, that banks can take advantage of.
Yeah, and we're a lot closer to the customers and what you're doing, and a lot of the companies that we work with are founded within the last 10 years. So we're growing together and working together.
Totally. Hiroki, any thoughts from yourself? GoCardless is doing very interesting things in the open banking space, which has some implications for companies like Visa and MasterCard. And we've spoken at length about that duopoly and that tight grip over the payments industry. What do you think to that particular narrative? Obviously, you can cooperate with many of the big financial players, but at the same time, you are obviously competing quite aggressively with your open banking technology as well.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately it comes down to focus, right? You can only do a few things really, really well. If you try and spread yourself too thin, then you're not going to be able to do anything particularly well. And when you take that kind of more focused approach, then there's places where it makes sense to be really direct and work very closely directly with your customers. But there's other places where maybe it makes more sense to partner. And for us, I think the whole kind of partnership as a topic is something that's interesting, in particular in fintech, because it takes different forms, right? You were touching on the partnerships that you have with banks in order to enable the services. That's similar for us. But at the same time, we compete with the banks. The software platforms that we partner with to enable people to collect payments from within the software they're already using. And then more recently, what we found is that we have a really great proposition and have won directly with merchants where bank payments is a really big share of their wallet. But there's a lot of use cases where bank payments is going to be a much smaller part of what they do, right? And in those cases, actually partnering with other payment companies as well.
Yeah.
So, for example, partnering with Airwallex and other payment providers as well, where maybe our proposition is really interesting, but wouldn't warrant another relationship. You want it really embedded into the offering you already have. And so, for us, partnerships has always been super, super key to everything that we do.
Yeah, let's talk about the GoCardless Airwallex partnership story a little bit more, Lucy. Obviously there's fintechs partnering with banks, but obviously there's fintechs partnering with fintechs. And although I suppose some people might consider yourselves competitors, in a way, considering you're doing cross-border payments and payments more domestically, maybe from a GoCardless perspective, Hiroki.
Yeah.
How does that sort of work, on the partnership side? Is it better just to sort of realize what your strengths are and where you might not have so many strengths in terms of the sort of broader platform?
Well, I think like Hiroki said, partnership takes in many forms. It's not just about working together, but also about, looking at launching the product at the right time in the market. Speed to launch is absolutely one of the key things that we look for. We can't possibly do everything. So, working together with another fintech is definitely, we love working with fintechs. It's like the conversation's a lot more.
It's easier than working with banks.
Yeah. But it's faster, and we are always on the same page. And at the end of the day, we're looking at how we can extravagate the most value out of these partnerships, and how we can, play to each other's strengths. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
More broadly, you mentioned, Hiroki, obviously, it's easier working with fintechs than it is with banks. Overall, the banking experience that we have in terms of payments, in terms of, moving money around the world, it's still really cumbersome. It's still, it's moving on in terms of digital prowess, and now, banks have their own apps, obviously. But any perspectives from yourself about the state of how banks have embraced those technologies? Have times changed, from that 5 years ago, maybe when we were talking about Monzos of the world and Revoluts and Starlings competing with the banks? Is it more banks are actually realising that change and that they can't, like we say, do everything themselves, but basically?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that that's a pretty broad question in some ways.
Yeah.
I definitely think the banks have realised and embraced the need to create much better digital experiences for their customers. And so that the banking apps that we use now are fundamentally easier to use than they were 5 years ago, right? And that I think is enabling a lot of improvement, right? So even things like open banking, if I think about what an open banking experience might have looked like 5 years ago, that would have been a pretty horrible experience, right? Now you have a mobile app that you can connect directly into. It's got Face ID or biometrics, so you can authenticate very easily. That whole experience is getting better and better. So I think that's an enabler of a lot of innovation that's happening in the market. I think also, though, the reality is that what banks have historically served their merchants and their customers with is so broad, right? There's so many different offerings. And the ability to really innovate and make great products across such a broad set of offerings is really, really difficult. And I think that's where there's an opportunity for fintechs like GoCardless, like Airwallex, like others, to create much more focused offerings that take a specific product area and make it really great, right? And that's where I think we can add a lot of value.
And how much of an opportunity do you sort of see ahead, Hiroki, just to expand on that? Obviously payments is a massive, massive market. I mean, there's still so much. You've done so much. You've built a multi-billion-dollar unicorn, both of you, really. But are you just at the start, in terms of where this goes?
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the things that's exciting for me about payments as a sort of ecosystem is that what we're talking about is such big markets, right? There's hundreds of trillions of dollars moving around the system every year. That payments in general is a $3 trillion market. This is something I always remind people about. I mean, it's almost $3 trillion, which is almost 3% of global GDP, right? Just to put that into perspective, agriculture is about 4% of global GDP. So we spend like almost as much on payments as we do on feeding the world, which doesn't seem quite right. So these are huge markets, and yes, we've had some success, but for me, I feel like we're still scratching the surface, right? I mean, the opportunity is so great. So that's one of the things that's exciting about the impact that you can have in this space.
Was it the same perspective from your end as well, Lucy?
So I think, if you look at payments, anything we do, or anything business-related, personal-related, is related to payments. There's innovation in every industry that's going forward, in terms of how people can interact with each other, how they're spending money, these user behaviors, which makes it really interesting because some of the industries that we work with at Airwallex are very new themselves. Like they came up in the last 3-5 years, cross-border online streaming, e-commerce, the likes of TikTok Shop. These are very new things, and I think in the future there very likely be new business models that the payment industry needs to work together to solve. And so I think there's always new things that we can work on. That's very exciting.
What's the most exciting thing at Airwallex? What you wake up in the morning, the one thing that's on your brain right now, what are you most excited about?
So I think one of the things that we've really started to heavily invest on is embedded finance over the past 1 or 2 years. I mean, it's not a new concept. I mean, I'm pretty sure as a journalist, you've wrote about it, you've heard about it. But I think, but really only in the last 2 years, we started figuring out how that actually works. I mean, from the user experience perspective, we were talking about, like, as a consumer, you probably wouldn't even tell because it's probably something that's embedded, right?
Yeah.
It's basically, it's going to become your normal, like, user behavior within that business app. But in reality, there's so many things that goes on behind, and how we can not only talk about cost cutting, saving money, but also creating values and making sure that, fintech or non-fintech, finance or non-finance platforms are able to offer these finance services.
Yeah, so the infrastructure play on the background, it's the real opportunity
exactly.
there.
So it's not just about bringing offline online. It's also about, what is happening in the background that really makes it more efficient, more cost-effective, and, creating more value.
Totally. Hiroki, what gets you up out of bed in the morning?
My
Apart
kids
from
mainly.
Kids,
we remain really excited about open banking, right? I think this is what I'm seeing. This exciting me a lot more recently is how the propositions that we're being able to create are getting just stronger and stronger, and we're being able to create, like, much better and more compelling experiences for our customers. But also, what's exciting me is the level of interest in the merchant base that we have, and we're just seeing new use cases emerge that we hadn't really anticipated, and I think are going to really start to shift the way that people are paying, and that's something that we're super, super excited about.
Any examples of those surprising use cases, things that you
some that I can talk about, some that I can't. I think we're seeing some use cases in, like, point of sale as an example, which is quite interesting. And then there's some, like, quite exciting experiments that we're starting to explore with some really exciting names as well that I can't talk about at the moment, but.
More to come. TBC for now. I want to ask you as well, Hiroki, about particularly the opportunity that you're unpacking is really interesting, because I've had a lot of conversations in recent months about MasterCard and Visa, and just really, like, the setup of a current payments ecosystem. It is reliant on that credit card network, or just card network that we're so dependent on. In your wallet, you'll either have a Visa or a MasterCard. It is never in between. Do you see that changing? With the technology that you've made, where it is more bank-to-bank payments, and there's a way of bypassing those very lofty interchange fees. Do you see that? Are you making a crack at that?
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, I think it's inevitable, right? I mean, I was talking about how big the payments market is. It doesn't make sense that the world spends 3% of GDP on payments, right? Like, that's too much. And a lot of it is because there's just too many intermediaries in between each transaction. And so I think fundamentally, like, that whole kind of 3 or 4 party model that you have with the card schemes, in the future, that's gonna get more efficient. It's gonna narrow down. When it happens is a big question, but I think it will definitely happen.
The $3 trillion question, inevitably. And Lucy, again, going back to the competition part of the equation, there are big banks, big fintechs as well. When we think of the context of fintech, you've got Stripe, you've got Checkout.com, you have Wise in the cross-border payment space as well. There's a lot of competition. How do you stand out from the crowd?
Yeah, so I think AirWallet competes with different players in many spaces. Each part of our, product offering has a competitor in somewhere. But, we are more increasingly seeing, these competition with these companies as well. So we work with, like, for example, Brex, which is also a banking as a service provider. So I think it's really playing to each other's strengths, and the market is way too big, like Hiroki said. And then I'm pretty sure it fits this many players. And if there's no competition, it means, it's probably not that worth investing into. So I think we're closely looking at what each other is doing, staying competitive, making sure, and that competition actually creates better user experiences and values. So I think, in terms of AirWallet, we're very invested in our infrastructure, which means that, we have a breadth and depth of, like probably one of the most comprehensive product suite that we have in fintechs. But then also we're not in the consumer space, so we work with B2C payment companies and fintechs as well.
And a question to both of you. The market is really big, and there are a lot of companies in the space. And it sort of feels like when we look, sort of 5-10 years down the horizon, you have to ask the question: will all these companies exist in the same world, the same space as each other, or will there be a bit of a clean-up or wash out of some of those less capable players? I don't know who wants to go first.
We're definitely seeing more consolidation.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. I think we'll continue to see more.
Yeah, I mean, we bought a few companies in the last... But I think it really depends on... Yeah, I think there's definitely enough space for more players, but I think doing one thing well and doing it like... It's not just about the application and... yes, so I think there will definitely be more consolidations in the market.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, I mean, fundamentally, to make payments work, you have to be a massive scale. And so, I think that there is likely to be consolidation. But I also think there's a tendency to conflate like payments as a single market, right? And the reality is it's lots of different markets with users with very different needs.
Yeah.
And so I still think that you'll have quite a few players out there, even in a world where there is consolidation.
Totally, yeah. It's one of those where there's just so many different things. Obviously we're talking about open banking now, cross-border payments. There's so many different kind of parts of the payments ecosystem, the value chain that even that many of us don't even think about in our day-to-day. That there's so much opportunity to unpack. I want to move on to a bit of a fun topic. I don't know how many founders and stuff are in the audience. I'm not going to do that whole thing of like, oh, please raise your hand if you're a founder. Gets a bit awkward when you do that. But I imagine you'll be interested to hear about, what is it like in the coalface, when you're hunkering down and you're building a big business. I don't know, Lucy, if you want to kind of start off with, what's it like, as a co-founder of business? What are the ups? What are the downs? What are the in-betweens?
I think, well, like you said, it's the ups and downs, right? It's like a roller coaster ride and while running a marathon at the same time. But I think because as founders, we're inherently very passionate and very invested in the business that we do. It's not like we're forcing ourselves to go to work. It's just part of life. So you just have to be very passionate about what you're doing and also have that conviction that it's going to work. And if it doesn't, I mean, if it only costs you like a month of your business, cash burn or whatever, and that's totally fine. I mean, you move on and you evolve and you solve problems.
Brush yourself off, pick yourself up, and
resilience
and carry.
is the way to go.
Yeah, and I mean, any like make or break stories for you? Were there any times in MLX's history where you're sort of like, oh my god, this is really hard?
Every day is hard. I mean, you solve one issue and then the next thing comes up, and it just goes up in scale as well. We used to probably one day think, this is a very big issue, and then now looking at it is probably nothing, right? So as founders, we just have to grow with the business and being able to, just tackle it heads on. Yeah. Indeed,
resilience is key. Hiroki, we've been talking offline about a certain story once upon a time when you were on a mattress making some calls. Would you like to share any of that with the audience here?
I think what Lucy said about resilience for me is like a key point, right? At least in our experience, you have a lot of existential crises, especially in the earlier days, where you're not really sure, like, are you onto something? Are you just seeing the world in a completely different way, and are you wrong? There's all these kind of questions that come up, and I think one of the challenges that you face as a founder is like deciding like when to stick and when to twist, right? When do you keep on going and when do you pivot? I think the story you're referring to is how we kind of started GoCardless in the first place. Like we pivoted because we were working on this different idea. It's going to take me too long to tell the whole story, but basically what led us to pivoting was a 2-week period where we decided to cold call a bunch of these like football team managers, like amateur football team managers that we found on the internet to try and sell our product. And after like 2 weeks of doing this, on mattresses on the floor, from Silicon Valley back into the UK, and realizing that we probably weren't onto the right thing, that was sort of what led to the soul searching that led to GoCardless. But I definitely think it's that resilience that you need that is super key.
And there's maybe a realization phase as well, right? When things don't go right, it's not like you just
decide. In the early days, they almost never go right. Yeah.
And look where you are today. Both multi-billion-dollar businesses.
It still feels like you're fighting all the time.
Okay, so we've got just under 2 minutes left of the conversation. I guess just pivoting again to the future. Lucy, Airwallex is at that stage now. You've raised a lot of money, a lot of cash, and very mature business that I'm sure investors are thinking. I mean, we were just talking backstage about Klarna just announced all of a sudden that it's going to go public in the States, in the US. Does it feel like a time where you start seeing more of that activity, IPO activity? It's been a very, for want of a better word, it's been a very grim few years, right?
So I think in a broader context, I think every company is a little bit different. We focus on ourselves, and for Airwallex, we just turned cash positive end of last year, so break even. In terms of cash reserve, we are comfortable. So I think it's really to looking at the right timing, and we're constantly in conversations with our investors, shareholders. But you definitely get a text from me when the time is right.
Yeah, thank you. That was more. I'm not going to rant about behind the scenes. Hiroki, perspectives from yourself.
No, I mean, look, I think it's hard to predict like the IPO markets and the markets in general.
Yeah.
I mean, what I do know is that there's some really fantastic businesses being built in like the fintech space, and sure, like I think the valuations sort of and the market has been challenging over the last few years, but I think these things are cyclical, right? And so we just focus on building a great business, and I think the rest will take care of itself.
Totally, and it's cool. I mean, I know that red timer keeps ticking down, and being very foreboding. But it's just a last reflection. It's quite cool. I think both of your businesses have produced other businesses and other fintechs as well. I know GoCardless, Hiroki. You've got Monzo from Tom Blomfield in the early days, and Matt Robinson now at Axel. It's quite cool to see that flywheel effect. So
I think the ecosystem and the way it's developed has been really amazing. I mean, even seeing events like this, compared to when we started GoCardless, WebSummit did not exist. So, so it's very different. Yeah.
Indeed. We've got 20 seconds. Any parting words from either of you?
We're 20 seconds over time.
Oh, we're over 20 seconds. Oh, God. Wow. I am so professional when it comes to this. Okay, I guess we're going to have to close there. But I wanted to say thank you so much, Lucy and Hiroki, for taking the time. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for taking the time to attend as well. Please go and enjoy some wine, beer, lovely meals, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.